The evening sky had already darkened as passengers lined up at Gate 27 for the red-eye flight from San Francisco to New York. Among them stood Olivia, gripping her laptop bag with one hand and checking emails with the other. As the CEO of Bloomtech, a rising software company she had built from scratch over the past 8 years, she rarely had a moment to breathe. "Final boarding call for Flight 372 to New York," announced the gate attendant. Olivia looked up from her phone, surprised that time had slipped away so quickly. She hurried to join the last few passengers boarding the plane, her mind still buzzing with the day's meetings. The quarterly numbers looked promising, but there were still so many decisions waiting for her attention. Behind her in line stood Thomas, a man in his mid-30s with gentle eyes that couldn't hide his exhaustion. He held the hand of a sleepy 5-year-old girl who clutched a well-loved stuffed elephant. "Daddy, are we going home now?" the little girl asked, rubbing her eyes. "Yes, Zoe," Thomas answered softly. "We'll be home by morning." "Think you can sleep on the plane?" Zoe nodded, leaning against her father's leg. "Can Mr. Elephant have the window seat?" Thomas smiled. "We'll see what we can arrange." As they made their way down the narrow airplane aisle, Olivia checked her boarding pass. 14B, a middle seat. She normally booked window seats, but this trip had been arranged last minute when an important investor requested an in-person meeting in New York. Her assistant had scrambled to find any available seat. Reaching row 14, Olivia found an elderly woman already settled in the aisle seat. She nodded politely as she squeezed past, trying not to disturb the woman who was already flipping through a magazine. Olivia had just stowed her laptop under the seat and was about to put in her earbuds when she heard a child's voice. "Look, Daddy! Mr. Elephant can see out the window from here." Thomas approached with Zoe, checking their boarding passes. 14A and 14C, he confirmed, looking at Olivia with an apologetic smile. "Looks like we're your row partners tonight." Olivia nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. A 5-hour flight with a child wasn't exactly conducive to getting work done or catching up on sleep. She had hoped for quiet neighbors. Thomas helped Zoe into the window seat, making sure her elephant had a good view. "Remember to use your inside voice, okay? People might be trying to sleep." "Okay, Daddy," Zoe whispered dramatically, making Thomas smile. He settled into his seat next to Olivia, careful to respect the invisible boundary of the armrest between them. "Sorry if she gets a little excited," he said quietly. "It's only her 3rd time flying." "It's fine," Olivia replied with a tight smile, already pulling out her tablet. As the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Thomas helped Zoe with her seatbelt and explained each part of the presentation in whispers. Olivia couldn't help but notice his patience, the way he answered each of Zoe's questions thoughtfully. "Why do we need oxygen masks if planes are supposed to stay in the air?" Zoe asked, loud enough for several rows to hear. "It's just in case the air gets thin up high," Thomas explained. "Like how we bring umbrellas even when the weather forecast says sunny. Better to have them and not need them." The explanation seemed to satisfy Zoe, who nodded solemnly. Once the plane took off, Olivia tried to focus on her work. She had a presentation to review for tomorrow's meeting, and several urgent emails from her team awaited responses. But the words on her screen kept blurring together. She had been awake since 5 a.m., and the gentle hum of the engines wasn't helping her stay alert. Next to her, Thomas pulled out a worn notebook and a pencil. Zoe was already drooping against the window, her elephant clutched tightly to her chest. "Long day?" Thomas asked, noticing Olivia's 3rd yawn in as many minutes. Olivia blinked, surprised by the question. Most people recognized her need to work and left her alone. "Very," she admitted. "Back-to-back meetings since morning." Thomas nodded. "Those days can be brutal. I used to have them all the time when—" He trailed off, his eyes flicking to Zoe. "Well, in my previous job." Something in his tone made Olivia curious despite herself. "What do you do now?" "I'm a freelance graphic designer," Thomas said. "It lets me set my own hours and be there for Zoe. We're heading back from visiting my parents in San Francisco." "That sounds flexible," Olivia said, trying to imagine a life where she could set her own hours. The concept seemed as foreign as living on the moon. "It has its challenges," Thomas admitted, "but it's worth it." His eyes drifted to Zoe, who had already fallen asleep, her mouth slightly open, her tiny hand still holding onto her elephant's trunk. The tenderness in Thomas's expression made something twist in Olivia's chest. When was the last time anyone had looked at her with such open affection? Her last relationship had ended 2 years ago. With her boyfriend complaining that she was married to her company. "She looks like a good kid," Olivia said, surprising herself with the comment. Thomas's face lit up. "The best. Smart as a whip, too. Keeps me on my toes with her questions." The flight attendant came by with the drink cart, momentarily pausing their conversation. Olivia ordered a sparkling water while Thomas asked for apple juice for when Zoe woke up. "Nothing for yourself?" Olivia asked. Thomas shook his head. "I need to stay sharp. She sometimes gets scared if she wakes up mid-flight." As the flight continued, Olivia found herself stealing glances at the father and daughter. There was something compelling about their relationship. The easy way Thomas cared for Zoe, even in her sleep. Adjusting her blanket when the air conditioning blew too strongly, gently moving her head to a more comfortable position when she slumped too far. Despite her intention to work, Olivia found her tablet screen growing dim as it went unused. The exhaustion of the day was catching up with her, making her eyelids heavy. She struggled to focus on the quarterly reports, reading the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing any information. Thomas had started sketching something in his notebook, his pencil moving with quiet confidence across the page. Curious, Olivia glanced over and saw the beginnings of a fantastic landscape, with towering trees and what looked like a tiny elephant riding on a cloud. "That's beautiful," she said before she could stop herself. Thomas looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Just some illustrations for a story Zoe and I are making up. She gives me the ideas, I try to bring them to life." "You're very talented. Thanks. It's just a hobby, really. Some hobbies are worth pursuing." Olivia thought of her own abandoned piano lessons, left behind when her company took off. The plane hit a patch of turbulence and the cabin lights flickered. Zoe stirred in her sleep, making a small distressed sound. Without hesitation, Thomas reached across and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, sweet pea," he murmured. "Just a bumpy road in the sky." Even in her sleep, Zoe seemed to hear him settling back down with a sigh. Olivia felt a strange pang watching the interaction. In her world of boardrooms and business deals, such simple, honest connections were rare. People always wanted something from her: funding, approval, mentorship. When was the last time someone had spoken to her without an agenda? As the turbulence continued, Olivia found herself gripping the armrests tightly, her knuckles whitening. She wasn't usually nervous on flights, but the combination of exhaustion and the jolting movements was making her stomach clench. Thomas noticed her discomfort. "Not a fan of flying?" he asked kindly. "Not a fan of not being in control," Olivia admitted with a wry smile. Thomas laughed softly. "I can relate to that. Life with a 5-year-old is basically one long lesson in letting go of control." The plane dropped suddenly, eliciting gasps from several passengers. Olivia's tablet slid from her lap and Thomas caught it smoothly before it hit the floor. "Thanks," Olivia said, taking back the device with slightly shaky hands. "No problem." Thomas's voice was steady, calming. "The pilots know what they're doing. This is just like driving over potholes, except the potholes are made of air." The explanation was so simple, so logical, that Olivia felt her anxiety ease slightly. It was the kind of thing she might have said to reassure her team during a company crisis. The captain's voice came over the intercom, confirming they were experiencing some turbulence, but assuring passengers it would pass shortly. True to his word, within minutes the flight smoothed out, and the seatbelt sign was turned off. Olivia relaxed her grip on the armrests, feeling slightly embarrassed by her reaction. "Thanks for the reality check," she said to Thomas. "Sometimes I forget not everything is a crisis that needs managing." "Occupational hazard?" he asked with a smile. "Something like that." The cabin lights dimmed as the flight entered its overnight phase. Around them, passengers adjusted their seats and pulled out travel pillows. The elderly woman in the aisle seat was already snoring softly. Olivia's eyes felt heavier by the minute. She put her tablet away, knowing she wouldn't get any more work done tonight. Tomorrow would be soon enough to finish reviewing the presentation. As she leaned back in her seat, she glanced once more at Thomas, who had returned to his sketching, the soft scratching of his pencil oddly comforting in the quiet cabin. For the first time in what felt like forever, Olivia allowed herself to simply exist, without checking emails or planning her next move. The hum of the engines and the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping child created a cocoon of tranquility that gradually pulled her toward Sleep. Her last conscious thought was that tomorrow's meeting seemed very far away, and for once, that didn't feel like a problem that needed solving. Olivia fought against sleep for as long as she could. The gentle hum of the airplane engines and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the little girl by the window made her eyelids grow heavier with each passing minute. She had planned to review her presentation notes one more time, but the words on her tablet blurred together, dancing across the screen in a way that made no sense at all. Just 5 minutes, she told herself, closing her eyes. 5 minutes to rest and then back to work. But her body had other plans. The week of 16-hour workdays, endless meetings, and constant decision-making had finally caught up with her. Sleep came swiftly, pulling her under like an ocean wave that couldn't be fought. Thomas noticed the moment Olivia's head began to droop. He watched from the corner of his eye as she struggled to stay upright, her head bobbing slightly before tilting sideways. He'd seen that same exhausted determination in the mirror many times, the stubborn refusal to admit that sometimes the body simply needed rest. When her head finally came to rest against his shoulder, he didn't move. He didn't want to embarrass her by waking her up. Everyone needed sleep, especially someone who clearly pushed herself as hard as she did. So instead, he carefully adjusted his position to make his shoulder a more comfortable pillow, trying not to disturb her. The flight attendant walked by, raising an eyebrow at the scene. Thomas gave a small shake of his head and mouthed, "Let her sleep," with a gentle smile. The attendant nodded understandingly and continued down the aisle. For a while, Thomas sat perfectly still, trying not to move even an inch. His sketchbook lay open on his lap, his hand frozen mid-drawing. He'd been working on an illustration for Zoe's bedtime story, a tale about a brave little elephant who could fly on clouds. But now, with Olivia's head resting on his shoulder, he was afraid that any movement might wake her. Zoe stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about cookies before settling back down, her small fingers still clutching her stuffed elephant. Thomas smiled at his daughter, his heart full. Being a single parent wasn't easy, but moments like these, even on a cramped overnight flight, reminded him how lucky he was. An hour passed. The cabin was dark now, with most passengers either asleep or watching movies on the small screens in front of them. Thomas's arm had begun to go numb, but he didn't dare move. He'd managed to continue his sketching with his free hand, though the results were far from his best work. Olivia shifted in her sleep, her face relaxing in a way it hadn't when she was awake. The stern lines between her eyebrows smoothed out, making her look younger, more vulnerable. A strand of her hair fell across her face, and Thomas had to resist the urge to brush it back. That would definitely cross a line. "Is that lady sleeping on you, Daddy?" Zoe's whispered question startled Thomas. He hadn't noticed his daughter waking up. "Yes, honey, but it's okay. She's very tired," he whispered back. Zoe studied Olivia with curious eyes. "Like when you fall asleep on the couch after working all night?" Thomas smiled at his daughter's perception. "Exactly like that. Should we give her a blanket?" "You always say I need a blanket when I'm sleeping." Thomas's heart swelled at his daughter's thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you, Zoe. I think she'd appreciate that." With careful movements, Zoe pulled her own small travel blanket from her backpack and passed it to her father. Thomas took it with his free hand and, with gentle movements, managed to drape it across Olivia's shoulders without waking her. "Good job, Daddy," Zoe whispered, giving him a thumbs up before returning to watching the clouds through the window, her elephant perched on her lap for a better view. The airplane hit a patch of turbulence, causing the cabin to shake. Thomas instinctively put his arm around Olivia's shoulders to steady her, the same protective gesture he would have used for Zoe. The movement was automatic, born from years of making sure his daughter didn't bump her head or fall when the world got shaky. Olivia stirred but didn't wake, her subconscious registering the safety of the arm around her. She mumbled something that sounded like quarterly reports before nestling closer to Thomas's shoulder, finding a more comfortable position. Thomas couldn't help but smile. Even in her sleep, this woman was thinking about work. He wondered what drove her, what made her push herself so hard that she could fall into such a deep sleep on a stranger's shoulder. His own career had once been just as demanding, back when he worked at a major advertising firm. The long hours and constant pressure had nearly broken him, until Zoe came along and changed everything. The plane steadied, and Thomas carefully removed his arm from around Olivia's shoulders, not wanting to overstep. He returned to his sketching, working on the details of a cloud shaped like a castle, where his elephant character could have adventures. Another hour passed. The flight attendants began preparing for a mid-flight beverage service, their quiet movements accompanied by the gentle clink of cups and ice. "Sir, would you like anything to drink?" A flight attendant whispered, careful not to disturb the sleeping passengers. "Just water, please," Thomas replied softly, "and maybe an orange juice for when my daughter wakes up again." The flight attendant smiled, placing the drinks on his tray table. "Your wife is sound asleep. Should I come back later for her?" Thomas felt his cheeks warm. "Oh, she's not we're just sitting next to each other. We don't know each other." The flight attendant's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, I'm sorry, I just assumed." "She looks so comfortable." Thomas nodded, not knowing what else to say. It was an easy mistake to make, he supposed. There was an unexpected intimacy in allowing a stranger to sleep against you. As the flight attendant moved on, Thomas sipped his water, careful not to jostle Olivia. The cabin was peaceful, with only the low hum of the engines and occasional murmurs from awake passengers breaking the silence. Thomas thought about his life back in New York, the small apartment he shared with Zoe, his freelance design work, the routine they had built together. It wasn't the life he had planned, but it was full of joy in unexpected ways. After his wife Lisa had passed away 3 years ago, he'd thought happiness might be permanently out of reach. But Zoe had pulled him through, her resilience teaching him how to find joy again, one day at a time. He wondered about Olivia's life, what made her smile, what kept her up at night besides work, whether she had someone waiting for her in New York or San Francisco. There was something about her that intrigued him, beyond her obvious beauty or success. Perhaps it was the glimpse of vulnerability he'd seen when turbulence hit, or the way she had genuinely admired his sketches without the polite dismissal he often received when telling people he was a children's book illustrator. The plane hit another patch of rough air, this time more severe. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on and the captain's voice came over the intercom, asking flight attendants to take their seats. Thomas immediately put his arm back around Olivia, steadying her as the plane bucked and dropped. This time the movement was enough to wake her. Her eyes flew open, momentarily disoriented and alarmed. "It's okay," Thomas said calmly, his voice steady. "Just some turbulence. We're fine." Olivia blinked, taking a moment to process where she was and what was happening. Then her eyes widened as she realized she had been sleeping on his shoulder, and that his arm was around her. "Oh my God," she said, straightening up immediately. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's really fine," Thomas assured her, removing his arm now that she was awake. "You were tired. It happens to everyone." Olivia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she noticed the small blanket that had fallen to her lap. "Did you—" "That was Zoe's idea," Thomas explained, nodding toward his daughter, who was watching them with curious eyes. "She thought you might be cold." Olivia turned to the little girl, her embarrassment giving way to genuine gratitude. "That was very thoughtful of you, Zoe, thank you." Zoe beamed at the acknowledgement. "Daddy says everyone deserves to be comfy when they're sleeping. Even grown-ups. Your daddy is very wise," Olivia said, her eyes meeting Thomas's with a mix of gratitude and lingering embarrassment. The plane continued to shake, and Olivia gripped the armrests tightly, her knuckles whitening. Without thinking, Thomas placed his hand over hers. "Try taking deep breaths," he suggested. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. It helps with the anxiety." Olivia looked surprised at his touch but didn't pull away. She followed his instructions, taking a deep breath and releasing it slowly. The simple act seemed to center her. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the turbulence. "About 2 hours," Thomas replied, removing his hand from hers now that the plane seemed to be stabilizing. 2 hours? Olivia looked shocked. "I never sleep that long on flights. I never sleep that well anywhere, actually." Thomas smiled. "Sometimes the body knows what it needs better than the brain does." Olivia smoothed her hair, still processing the fact that she had spent the last 2 hours using a stranger as a pillow. "I'm really sorry. That must have been uncomfortable for you." "Not at all," Thomas assured her. "I'm used to being a pillow. Right, Zoe?" "Daddy's the best pillow," Zoe confirmed seriously. "Better than Mr. Elephant, even." The simple comment broke the tension and Olivia found herself laughing, a genuine unguarded sound that surprised even her. When was the last time she had laughed like that? She couldn't remember. The turbulence subsided and the seatbelt sign dinged off. The flight attendant came by to check if everyone was okay, and Olivia requested a cup of tea. "I should get some work done," she said, reaching for her tablet. But instead of opening her presentation, she found herself turning back to Thomas. "Thank you. Not just for letting me use you as a pillow, but for being kind about it." Thomas's smile reached his eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Olivia said with certainty. "They wouldn't have." She'd traveled enough to know that most people would have woken her immediately, annoyed at the invasion of their personal space. As the flight continued through the night, something had shifted between them. An unexpected connection formed at 35,000 feet, born of simple human kindness and the vulnerable state of sleep. Neither of them knew exactly what it meant, but both felt it. A gentle awakening to the possibility that sometimes the most meaningful connections come when we least expect them. The tea was hot and comforting in Olivia's hands as she tried to shake off the lingering fog of deep sleep. She couldn't remember the last time she had slept so soundly, especially on a plane. Somehow the shoulder of this stranger had been more comfortable than her expensive memory foam pillow at home. "I really can't believe I slept for 2 hours," she said, taking a careful sip. "I usually consider it a victory if I get 20 minutes of uninterrupted sleep." Thomas smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The flight attendant thought you were my wife. She seemed surprised when I told her we'd just met." Olivia nearly choked on her tea. "Oh God, that's mortifying." "Not at all," Thomas replied with a gentle laugh. "She just saw someone sleeping peacefully and made an assumption. Happens all the time." Zoe, who had been quietly drawing on the tray table, looked up with curious eyes. "Are you a princess?" she asked Olivia suddenly. Thomas looked mortified. "Zoe, that's not—" "It's okay," Olivia said, turning to the little girl with a genuine smile. "I'm not a princess, sweetie. What made you think that?" Zoe pointed to Olivia's silk blouse and the delicate gold watch on her wrist. "You look fancy, like the business princesses in Daddy's stories." "Business princesses?" Olivia raised an eyebrow at Thomas, intrigued. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, looking slightly embarrassed. "In our stories, princesses can be anything they want. Some run kingdoms, others run companies." "I like that," Olivia said, surprised by how much she meant it. She turned back to Zoe. "I do run a company, but I'm definitely not a princess." "What kind of company?" Zoe asked, resting her chin on her hands. "We make computer programs that help other businesses," Olivia explained, simplifying her usual pitch. "Kind of like digital tools, like Daddy's drawing tools?" Zoe asked. "Something like that." Olivia nodded, impressed by the child's quick connection. As Zoe returned to her drawing, Olivia noticed the notebook on Thomas's lap. It was open to a detailed sketch of a fantastical landscape with cloud castles and tiny elephants wearing what looked like business suits. "Business elephants too?" she asked, nodding toward the drawing. Thomas laughed softly. "Zoe's idea. She thinks elephants would make excellent CEOs because they never forget anything." "Smart kid," Olivia said, genuinely impressed. "Most of my board would benefit from an elephant's memory." Thomas flipped through the notebook, showing her more illustrations. A rabbit running a bakery, a family of squirrels managing a library, and a wise old owl teaching young birds how to navigate by the stars. "These are incredible," Olivia said, taking in the detailed drawings. "You're really talented." "Thanks," Thomas replied, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "It started as just bedtime stories for Zoe, but it's turned into something bigger over time." "Daddy writes the best stories," Zoe chimed in, not looking up from her own drawing. "But the book people don't think so." Olivia glanced at Thomas, who shrugged with a rueful smile. Translation: "I've been trying to get a children's book published, but so far all I've collected is rejection letters." "That's hard," Olivia said, knowing something about rejection herself. The early days of her company had been filled with doors closing in her face. "How many publishers have you tried?" 12, Thomas said, closing the notebook. "Lucky number 13 is still out there somewhere, I guess." There was something in his voice, not defeat exactly, but a quiet resignation, that struck Olivia. Here was a man with obvious talent, creating stories that clearly delighted his daughter, yet he couldn't get past the gatekeepers of the publishing world. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the notebook. Thomas hesitated for a moment before handing it over. Just rough drafts, nothing polished. Olivia carefully opened the notebook and began reading the handwritten story that accompanied the illustrations. It was about a little elephant named Ellie, who was afraid of heights but dreamed of living in a cloud castle. The story followed her journey as she overcame her fear with the help of friends, ultimately discovering that what made a home wasn't where it was located, but who you shared it with. Simple words, but the message hit Olivia unexpectedly hard. When was the last time she had thought of her expensive penthouse apartment as a home? It was just a place she slept sometimes, when she wasn't at the office or on a plane to the next meeting. She couldn't remember the last time she'd invited friends over. Did she even have friends anymore or just business associates? "This is really good," she said finally, her voice slightly hoarse. "The message about home. It's something adults need to hear just as much as kids do." Thomas looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to dig deeper than the surface of the story. "Thanks, that's what I was going for. Daddy writes from here," Zoe said, pointing to her chest. "That's what Grandma says." "Your grandma is right," Olivia said, handing the notebook back to Thomas. "The best stories always come from the heart." For a moment, none of them spoke. The airplane hummed around them, a world in itself suspended between destinations. Olivia felt a strange sense of suspension in her own life. This peaceful bubble at 35,000 feet was so removed from her normal existence that it almost felt like stepping into one of Thomas's storybook worlds. "So, what made you want to write children's books?" Olivia asked, genuinely curious. There was something about Thomas that didn't fit the stereotype of a struggling artist. His clothes were simple but well chosen, and he had the confident bearing of someone who had once navigated professional spaces. Thomas glanced at Zoe, who had become absorbed in her drawing again, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. "I used to work in advertising," he said quietly. "Creative director at a big agency in Manhattan. 60-hour weeks, corner office, the whole package. What changed?" Olivia asked, though she had a feeling she already knew. Thomas's eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. "Life changed. My wife Lisa got sick when Zoe was just 2. Cancer. After she died, I tried to keep up with the job, but it was impossible. Zoe needed me, and I needed something different." The simple way he said it, without self-pity or dramatics, made Olivia's chest tighten. She was used to people who turned their personal struggles into performative displays. Thomas just stated his reality as a fact. "I'm sorry about your wife," she said softly. Thomas nodded in acknowledgement. "It was 3 years ago now. We're finding our way." He tapped his notebook. "These stories started as a way to help Zoe process everything. They gave us a world where we could work through big feelings in a safe way. Then I realized I actually enjoyed creating them." "Daddy does all the voices," Zoe piped up, apparently tuned into their conversation despite appearing absorbed in her drawing. "The elephant sounds like this." She made a trumpeting sound that was surprisingly accurate for a 5-year-old. Thomas laughed, the serious moment broken by his daughter's interjection. "My elephant impression is my greatest talent." "I'd like to hear it sometime," Olivia said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the statement. "What about you?" Thomas asked. "How did you end up running a tech company?" "That's not an easy path." Olivia rarely talked about her background. In business settings, she kept her origin story polished and inspirational, perfect for investor pitches or magazine profiles. But sitting here in the dim light of the airplane cabin, with most passengers asleep around them, she found herself wanting to tell the truth. "I was a foster kid," she said quietly. "Bounced around the system until I was 18. Got a scholarship to college and basically lived in the computer lab because I didn't have anywhere else to go during breaks." Thomas's eyes registered surprise, but not pity, something Olivia appreciated more than he could know. "I built my first program to help organize the campus food pan. She continued, then one for the financial aid office. By senior year, I had a handful of clients and a business license. 8 years later, here we are, 300 employees and offices in 4 cities. That's incredible," Thomas said, and she could tell he meant it. Just a different kind of survival. Olivia shrugged, uncomfortable with praise for what had always felt like necessity. "No," Thomas shook his head. "Don't downplay it. Building something from nothing, that takes more than survival instincts. That takes vision. No one had ever put it quite that way before. Investors praised her business acumen. Magazines highlighted her as a woman in tech, but few people recognized the deeper drive that had pushed her forward. Something about Thomas's simple observation made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "Look, Daddy, I drew the business lady with us in Cloud Castle." Zoe's excited voice broke the moment as she held up her drawing. There in bright crayon was a childish rendition of 3 figures standing on a cloud. A small figure with pigtails, a taller one with a beard, and a woman in what appeared to be a business suit with a crown on her head. "It's beautiful." "Sweetheart," Thomas said. "The perfect business princess," Olivia added with a smile. As Zoe beamed with pride, Olivia felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the carefully constructed wall that separated her professional self from everything else. And through that crack, something warm and unfamiliar began to seep in. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, announcing they were halfway through their journey to New York. Some passengers stirred, while others remained wrapped in airline blankets, determined to squeeze every possible minute of sleep from the red-eye flight. Olivia checked her watch, 3:30 a.m. In a normal world, she would have been fast asleep, but here she was, fully awake and engaged in conversation with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger anymore. "So," she said, turning back to Thomas's notebook that still lay open between them. "Tell me more about these rejections. Did publishers give you specific feedback?" Thomas chuckled softly. "The usual form letters mostly. Not the right fit for our catalog at this time. One editor was kind enough to say the artwork showed promise, but the market for elephant protagonists was oversaturated." "Oversaturated?" Olivia repeated incredulously. "How can elephant protagonists be oversaturated? Apparently there was an elephant boom in children's literature last year," Thomas said with a shrug. "Who knew?" Olivia shook her head. "That sounds like an excuse. These illustrations are beautiful and the story has real heart." She flipped through more pages of the notebook, admiring the intricate details in each drawing. "Have you tried Harper Bright Publishing? They specialize in picture books with meaningful messages." Thomas's expression changed, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Actually, yes. They were rejection number 7. "How do you know about them?" "They're not exactly a household name." Olivia hesitated for a moment. "My sister is an acquisition editor there." "Your sister works at Harper Bright?" Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "Small world. Very small," Olivia agreed. "Her name is Alice Chen. Have you dealt with her?" Thomas shook his head. "The rejection came from someone named Patricia Wells." "Ah, Patty. She handles the initial screening. My sister sees maybe 1 in 20 submissions." Olivia studied his illustrations more closely. "These definitely should have made it past the first round." "Well, apparently not," Thomas said, but there was no bitterness in his voice. "It's a subjective business. I tell myself that every time a new rejection arrives." Zoe, who had been quietly coloring, suddenly perked up. "Are you talking about Ellie's adventures? Can I show her my favorite parts, Daddy?" Thomas smiled at his daughter. "Sure, if Olivia wants to see them." "I'd love that," Olivia said sincerely. Zoe scrambled onto her father's lap to get a better position, then reached for the notebook. With great authority, she flipped to a specific page. "This is when Ellie meets the cloudbirds," she explained, pointing to an illustration of the little elephant character looking up in wonder at a flock of birds with cloud-shaped wings. "They're scary at first because they're different, but then they teach her how to be brave." Olivia leaned closer, taking in the details. The little elephant's expression was so perfectly captured, a mixture of fear and curiosity that felt deeply familiar. "And this one," Zoe continued, turning to another page, "is where Ellie finds out that her trunk can reach all the way to the clouds if she believes it can. See how surprised she looks?" The illustration showed the elephant character with her trunk stretched impossibly high, touching a low-hanging cloud. Her eyes wide with disbelief and joy. "These are really special, Zoe," Olivia said. "I love how you can see exactly what Ellie is feeling. Daddy says that's the most important part of drawing," Zoe explained seriously. "Showing the feelings, not just the things." Olivia looked up at Thomas, impressed. "That's good advice for any creative work, or business presentation for that matter." Thomas seemed surprised by her comment. "I wouldn't have thought business presentations had much room for emotion." "The best ones do," Olivia said. "People make decisions based on feelings, then justify them with facts. I learned that the hard way after several spectacular failures early on." Zoe continued turning pages, narrating the story in her own words, occasionally looking to her father for help with the harder parts. Olivia found herself completely drawn in, not just by the charming illustrations, but by the relationship between father and daughter, the gentle way Thomas guided Zoe without taking over, the absolute trust in Zoe's eyes when she looked to him for help. When they reached the end of the story, Zoe yawned widely, the excitement of sharing her favorite book apparently giving way to the late hour. "I think someone needs a little more sleep," Thomas said, smoothing Zoe's hair. "I'm not tired," Zoe protested even as her eyelids drooped. "I want to talk more with the business lady." "My name is Olivia," she reminded the little girl gently. "Olivia," Zoe repeated, testing the name. "That's pretty. Like olive trees." "Back to your seat, sweetheart," Thomas said, helping Zoe climb back to her window seat. "Mr. Elephant is missing you." Zoe settled in, pulling her stuffed elephant close and rearranging her small blanket. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. "She's incredible," Olivia said softly. "So articulate and thoughtful for her age." "She's had to grow up faster than I would have liked," Thomas admitted, his voice equally quiet. "But kids are resilient. Sometimes I think she's handling everything better than I am." There was a vulnerability in his admission that touched something in Olivia. In her world, people rarely admitted to struggling. It was seen as weakness, something to be hidden at all costs. "I meant what I said about your work," she said after a moment. "It really is special. I can't believe it's been rejected so many times." Thomas closed the notebook, running his hand over the worn cover. "It's a tough industry, and truthfully, I haven't been as strategic as I could be. Between freelance work and taking care of Zoe, I don't have much energy left for marketing myself or networking." Olivia nodded, understanding completely. The business side of creative work is its own full-time job. "Exactly," Thomas agreed. "And right now, Zoe is my priority. The books can wait." Olivia found herself struck by his clarity. How different from her own approach to life, where work had always been the priority. Everything else pushed to some undefined future when she'd made it. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. "Of course. Do you regret leaving your advertising career?" "The corner office, the prestige, all of that?" Thomas didn't answer immediately, which Olivia appreciated. He was actually considering the question, not just giving her a platitude. "Sometimes I miss the challenges," he said finally. "The big campaigns, the rush of landing a major client. But regret? No." He glanced at his sleeping daughter. "This path gave me something the corner office never could." "Purpose?" Olivia suggested. Thomas smiled. "I was going to say time, but purpose works too. They're connected, aren't they? What we choose to give our time to reveals what we truly value." The observation hit Olivia with unexpected force. What did her use of time say about her values? 70-hour work weeks, meals eaten at her desk, relationships that never developed because she was always too busy. What did that reveal about what she truly valued? "I've never thought about it that way," she admitted. "It took losing Lisa for me to see it clearly," Thomas said. "Before, I was always chasing the next promotion, the next raise. I thought I was building security for my family, but I was missing the actual living part of life." Olivia felt a lump forming in her throat. That's a hard lesson to learn." "The hardest," Thomas agreed, "but also the most important." He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to get so philosophical at 4 a.m. "No, I appreciate it," Olivia said, and she meant it. When was the last time she'd had a conversation that went deeper than quarterly projections or market strategies? They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the hum of the airplane creating a cocoon around their conversation. Then Olivia had an idea. "Thomas, would you let me show your work to my sister? Properly, I mean. Not just passing along your submission, but actually advocating for it." Thomas looked surprised. "That's incredibly kind, but you don't have to do that. We just met." "I know we did," Olivia said, "but I also know good work when I see it. Alice trusts my judgment. At the very least, she'd give it a fair look." "I don't know what to say," Thomas replied, clearly caught off guard by the offer. "Say yes," Olivia urged. "The worst that happens is it's another rejection, and you're already used to those." Thomas laughed softly. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" "Yes, and thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Olivia cautioned. "Publishing is still a business. I can't promise anything." "I understand," Thomas said. "But just having someone believe in the work enough to champion it, that means a lot." Their eyes met. and Olivia felt that strange shift again, that sense of something important happening beneath the surface of their conversation. In less than 5 hours, this man and his daughter had somehow bypassed all her usual defenses, reaching parts of herself she'd almost forgotten existed. Before she could examine the feeling too closely, the overhead lights in the cabin brightened slightly, and flight attendants began preparing for another round of beverage service. The artificial dawn of the airplane cabin was breaking, marking the beginning of the final hours of their journey. "Looks like we're in the home stretch," Thomas observed, glancing at his watch. "Yes," Olivia agreed, feeling an unexpected pang of regret. In New York, they would go their separate ways. Her to her corporate apartment and meetings, him to his life with Zoe. The thought left her with a hollow feeling she couldn't quite name. "I suppose we should try to get a little more sleep before landing," Thomas suggested. "Probably," Olivia agreed, though she felt more awake than she had in months. "But I'm not tired anymore." "Me neither," Thomas admitted with a small smile. And so, as the airplane continued its journey eastward toward the actual dawn, they kept talking, neither of them wanting to waste a minute of the unexpected connection they'd found at 35,000 feet. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom as the first hints of dawn appeared through the airplane windows. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into JFK International Airport. Local time is 6:15 a.m., and the weather in New York is clear and cool, around 55 degrees. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." Olivia looked out past Zoe's sleeping form at the golden-pink horizon. The night had passed in a blur of conversation. She and Thomas had talked about everything: his advertising career and the campaigns he was proudest of, her struggles to be taken seriously as a young female CEO, favorite books, travel disasters, and the small joys that made hard days worthwhile. It felt surreal that just hours ago they had been strangers. Now Olivia knew that Thomas took his coffee with cinnamon instead of sugar, that he could recite entire scenes from old black and white movies, and that he volunteered teaching art at Zoe's school one afternoon a week. In turn, she had shared things she rarely talked about: her collection of vintage typewriters, her secret dream of writing a novel someday, and her complicated feelings about success and what it had cost her. "I can't believe we're landing already," Thomas said, stifling a yawn. Neither of them had slept since Olivia woke up on his shoulder. "I know," she agreed, feeling strangely reluctant to see the journey end. "I should probably review my notes for today's meeting, but..." "But?" Thomas prompted when she didn't continue. Olivia smiled. "But I'd rather keep talking to you." The simple honesty of her statement surprised them both. The airplane banked gently, revealing the sprawling cityscape below. Skyscrapers caught the early morning light, glowing like copper and gold against the blue-gray backdrop of the river and bay. "Zoe," Thomas said softly, gently waking his daughter. "Look outside, honey. We're almost home." The little girl stirred, clutching her stuffed elephant as she blinked awake. Her hair was mussed from sleep, and she had a crease mark on her cheek from where she'd pressed against the window. "Are we there?" she asked sleepily. "Almost," Thomas replied. "See all the buildings?" "That's New York." Zoe peered out the window, her eyes widening. "It looks like a giant Lego city." "It does, doesn't it?" Olivia said, leaning over to see through Zoe's perspective. The city did indeed resemble a vast construction of toy blocks from this height. "Do you live in a tall building?" Zoe asked Olivia. Olivia nodded. "I do. On the 32nd floor." "Wow," Zoe breathed, clearly impressed. "Can you see the whole world from up there?" "Not quite the whole world," Olivia laughed. "But I can see the river and the park. It's pretty at sunset." "We live on the 3rd floor," Zoe informed her seriously. "We can see Mrs. Patel's garden and the ice cream truck when it comes on Tuesdays." "That sounds perfect," Olivia said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. There was something appealing about a home where you could actually feel connected to the life of the street below. As the plane descended, the flight attendants moved through the cabin, collecting trash and checking seatbelts. The spell of the night was breaking, reality intruding as they prepared to return to their separate lives. "So," Thomas said, his voice casual, though his eyes were intent. "What's the protocol here? Do we exchange business cards? Friend each other on social media? Pretend this never happened?" Olivia felt a flutter of something in her chest. Anxiety? Hope? "Well, I did promise to show your work to my sister. I'll need your contact information for that." "Right," Thomas said, Professional connections. Of course. And, Olivia added before she could overthink it, I'd like to know how Ellie's adventures continue. For personal interest. Thomas's smile brightened his entire face. I'd like that too. They exchanged phone numbers as the airplane made its final approach, the wheels touching down with a slight bounce and screech. Around them, passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings and switching on phones, breaking the intimate bubble of the overnight flight. What's your schedule like today? Thomas asked as they waited for the seatbelt sign to turn off. Brutal, Olivia admitted. Meeting with investors at 9, lunch with the development team, calls all afternoon, then dinner with a potential partner from the West Coast. Sounds exhausting, Thomas said. It's just another Tuesday, Olivia shrugged. Though suddenly her packed schedule felt less like a badge of honor and more like a burden. The plane taxied to the gate, and passengers began standing and retrieving luggage from the overhead bins. The businesswoman across the aisle was already on her phone, barking instructions to someone about presentation materials. A week ago, even yesterday, Olivia would have been doing the exact same thing. Well, Thomas said, helping Zoe gather her coloring books and stuffed elephant. I guess this is where we say goodbye for now. Something about the words "for now" warmed Olivia from within. For now, she agreed. As they exited the plane, the three of them walked together through the terminal, Zoe between them, occasionally skipping a step or two. They reached the security exit where they would need to go in different directions. Olivia to a waiting car service, Thomas and Zoe to the subway. Thank you, Olivia said, the words feeling inadequate. For what? Thomas asked. Using my shoulder as a pillow? For that, Olivia smiled. And for everything after. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Safe travels today, Olivia. I'll be in touch about the manuscript. I'll be looking forward to it, she replied. Zoe tugged on Olivia's sleeve. Bye, business lady. Don't forget about the elephants. Olivia crouched down to Zoe's level. I won't forget, I promise. Elephants never forget, and neither will I. Zoe beamed and impulsively wrapped her arms around Olivia's neck in a quick hug before returning to her father's side. With a final wave, they parted ways, Thomas and Zoe heading toward the subway signs. Olivia toward the exit where drivers waited with name cards. Her driver was easy to spot, a serious-looking man in a dark suit holding a tablet with Bloom Tech CEO displayed in large letters. Not her name, just her title. Somehow that detail struck her more forcefully than it ever had before. Good morning, Ms. Chen, the driver said, taking her carry-on bag. I hope you had a pleasant flight. The best, Olivia said, glancing back one last time at the terminal, where Thomas and Zoe had disappeared from view. In the car, Olivia opened her laptop automatically, but instead of reviewing her presentation, she found herself opening a new document. At the top she typed, Company Policy Revisions Family Flexibility Initiative. 3 weeks later, Olivia stood at the podium in Bloom Tech's largest conference room, facing her entire executive team and board of directors. The Family Flexibility Initiative isn't just about being nice, she explained, clicking to the next slide in her presentation. It's about recognizing